that there is that level of compliance. Equally, Mr. President, we have also spoken, particularly in the other place, more recently, the Honorable Attorney General, in his submission on this bill, he spoke about legislation which is still to come. Legislation which will cover also elements incorporated in the corruption legislation, the prevention of corruption legislation, whistleblowing legislation, integrity legislation, which is meant to come back with some changes, remediation legislation, which is also meant to come, so that we have a complete suite of legislative reforms passed through this Parliament, allowing the government and the enforcement agencies that have already been established to effectively ensure that the scourge of corruption does not continue to take center stage in our national discourse. Now, Mr. President, I want to spend a moment going through some of the bill just so we can understand, for the benefit of the record, that corruption is far more than the specter of a politician passing or receiving money, but it includes persons at multiple levels. It is on the same basis, Mr. President, that the integrity legislation also sought to ensure that we included a large raft of people well beyond those who are typically seen in the public eye. Mr. President, in Part 1 of the legislation, it speaks in the interpretation of how the Act is treated to, it speaks about a broad range of what can be defined as not just even corruption, but corruption is oftentimes seen as engaging in an action designed to seek advantage. Whether it is advantage according to the legislation by way of money, a gift, loan, fee, reward, a commission, some kind of bonus, a discount, a rebate, or even in areas that if you ask the average Barbadian, as some may call them, what is corruption, they may not even assume that any entry to an academic institution or course or any grant, scholarship, favorable academic results, or any other service, favor, or right, or privilege relating to education, those things constitute advantage and are covered in the corruption legislation. It includes, Mr. President, not just the passage of money for a given activity, but it includes also, Mr. President, simple things like any discharge or liquidation, payment, or release from a loan, from any obligation or any other liability, whether in whole or in part. All of those things in this legislation, in compliance with the UN Convention, constitute an advantage. One of the areas where, Mr. President, we have a lot of challenges oftentimes in terms of efficiency and turnaround time, and I believe the Honorable Attorney General made mention of it briefly in his own submission. It speaks about things like trying to expedite simple things like town and country planning permissions, insisting on and receiving benefits from, expediting and gaining an advantage in a map, a plan, drawing, or photograph, or any other information recorded or stored by means of any tape recorder, computer, or any other device. Mr. President, it covers not just these actions that people may not typically associate with corruption, but it also includes, Mr. President, importantly, beyond public officials, persons associated with international organizations. It covers the private sector. It involves people being disqualified from taking office and holding public office. These are the things, including things like contracts and tenders, Mr. President, that constitute corruption. And yes, it also includes things like passing money in order to get an advantage by way of electoral advantage, but that is not the only thing that constitutes corruption. There are other elements in the legislation, Mr. President, that I want to spend a moment on, specifically because I think it is important for us to understand, as is said by others, it takes two hands to clap. We have to ensure, and the UN Convention speaks to this, that we have to avoid public officials being able to use their access to decision-making and to power to influence outcomes. So if I am holding an office and my relative decides that they want to engage in a transaction, and they come and they say, but Lise, I want to do so and so and so and so. I can give you a piece if you expedite it for me. The answer has to be resoundingly no. And if the answer is not no, and you say, all right, give me a little something, and I can make the decision for you, then that too is corruption, Mr. President. But we have to equally hold and sensitize people that the asker is equally as compliant as the giver. And this legislation establishes the basis for every party to be held accountable in law. Now, we have laws on a range of things, Mr. President. We pass directives on a range of things. We set standards and have regulations on a range of things. But we know human behavior is such that enforcement then oftentimes becomes a challenge. And that is where the commission of which I spoke earlier comes in, Mr. President. That commission, that agency is responsible for ensuring that if you are in possession of unexplained sources of wealth, or you have gained an advantage by any of the mechanisms outlined in the legislation, that there is a mechanism that allows you to be held accountable. There are also developmental provisions within the legislation as derived from the UNDOC and the convention itself. It talks about things like civil service reform in order to ensure that we can strengthen service delivery. At the root of many of our challenges, Mr. President, is the concern and the perception, right or wrong, in some instances, unfortunately, we have to admit, correctly so, that there is a need for civil service reform in order to ensure efficient delivery of services. If people find themselves in a position where they're constantly going to a given agency and they're being turned around multiple times, and they're not getting to the end of what their transaction is supposed to be, and it's taking multiple visits to multiple offices, and still you're not quite clear what your outcome is going to be and when it is going to come, there is a need for reform and strengthening of the system. And this is one of the things that is called for in the legislation, because it is also the prevention, not just the enforcement elements of it, Mr. President. And there are a number of activities which are required by the state to ensure that we do not create the conditions where people feel the need to engage in corrupt practices. That includes reform of our civil service. That includes engaging with our judicial institutions and strengthening judicial institutions. One of the things that this administration has done, Mr. President, as you've seen, is to add more judges, is to ensure that there has been a concerted attempt to expedite justice so that cases no longer continue, or they cannot be allowed to continue to languish in the judicial system for years and years on end without resolution. That is still a work in progress, but there has to be, under the convention, a strengthening of our judicial institutions. Equally, it recognizes the role of the ombudsman. We've heard of the ombudsman, we've seen the work of the ombudsman. Those are measures and mechanisms which are recognized in the toolkit for the implementation of the Corruption Convention. Every year, and certainly we are ongoing now in the Public Accounts Committee of this Parliament, looking at the reports of the Auditor General. Audits and audit institutions and their strengthening are also inbuilt into the developmental mechanisms associated with this convention. And then finally, I want to spend a moment here on the most important institutional building element of the toolkit, which is on, again, those specialized anti-corruption agencies. It talks about a range of things that need to be undertaken. It really must be separate from established institutions which are embedded in the public service. It is also meant to work in collaboration with, but be on the outside of, existing law enforcement institutions. And it should also be some combination of the two, but separate and apart from. The tool also looks at topics such as a possible relationship with the Anti-Corruption Agency and other institutions, including across the political, legal, and public accountability spectrums, and how efficient such an institution may be in order to ensure that there is public credibility. That includes the development of action plans, national strategies, national awareness campaigns, and training programs for public officials. These are some of the provisions of the legislation, Mr. President, and then it goes on to speak also about the assessment of the institutional capabilities and capacities in order to respond. Now, the Honorable Attorney General in his submission spoke about the size of the existing financial crimes unit of the Royal Barbados Police Force, where it is not necessarily equipped with either the tools or the resources to be able to do this. But even so, under the convention, it talks about the establishment of specialized agencies to work along with existing agencies, especially those in the police force and those that are connected to the judiciary. So, Mr. President, those are some of the key elements that you will find in the legislation. But I want to close or to bring this home to speak on two remaining topics: social empowerment, social prevention, and public empowerment. People have to be comfortable stepping forward to say, I have seen something, I know something, something is wrong. People have to feel confident that what they know as corruption is actually corruption, and that there has not been I don't want to call it, I think the Honorable Attorney General, I chuckled when I listened to him last night when he was talking, when I was watching the video, and he says, many people like to gossip, but when it comes to giving evidence, that is an entirely different matter. We have to be able to sensitize our population to understand that when they see something, they have to say something. And they can't see selectively depending on who it is. So if it is the ogre politicians who only come to get what they could get and go on about the business, which is so far from true, certainly for this administration that I'm a part of, but that when they see it in any institution, that they say something. That has to be accompanied, therefore, Mr. President, by public education and sensitization campaigns. People have to know what they're looking for. There has to also be social prevention. And social prevention really talks about important things like remuneration. In the convention itself, it says if officials are paid below what their worth is and they are in highly exposed posts, it makes them vulnerable to corruption. Now, I give a bit of a story here, Mr. President. I remember when I was living overseas in my last incarnation, I was living in an African country at the time, and there were senior officials, equivalent to our senior officials here at the same post, and their monthly salaries, somewhere in the range of $900 USD a month was their salary. And I started to look at the question of social prevention and corruption in that sense, Mr. President. When people are so badly underpaid and they have the same obligations as everyone else and the same ambitions as everyone else, they want to own a home, they want to own a car, they want to send their children to the best schools, whether at home or abroad. They want to wear the clothes that they choose. They want to wear the shoes that they choose. They want to be able to have investments in the same as everyone else. But if they are taking on a responsibility at a sufficiently high level in public administration, and they are not effectively or adequately remunerated, Mr. President, then it makes them, under the convention, liable to be vulnerable to corruption. And so there is a social prevention that goes along with not just wanting to do the right thing because it is the right thing to do, but it also comes with empowering people and remunerating people adequately. The other element that I want to close on is the repatriation of illegal funds. There has been a significant body of legislation passed through this Parliament on the repatriation of illegal funds, seizure of assets, linking it to money laundering, linking it to anti-corruption, linking it to the international business sector. I believe we have here anti-corruption and anti-terrorism bill, and we also have in 2019 the money laundering bill. All of these are elements relating to the illegal acquisition of funds. These are also meant to be covered in this convention. When people are having what we call unexplained sources of wealth, you have an annual, a monthly salary of $3,000, but you are driving a car that is worth $200,000 and you can't explain how you purchased it. Those are unexplained sources of wealth. And the convention asks you to look at how we can treat to identifying those sources of funds, but also treating to the question of illegal funds. And in this administration, Mr. President, we have sought to lead the way by setting the example ourselves and ensuring that there has been a public disclosure by way of the Office of the Cabinet Office, where every person who sits on this side has been obligated to declare their assets, so that what you came in with and what you leave with has to make sense based on your sources of income. The truth of the matter is, most people would have come in with more than they can come up with, because most people came in and had to take and are earning significantly less than what they would have earned before, because they're loving country. For love of country, you make the decision to sacrifice to serve your nation. And I say to people all the time, I remember when I was moving back home the last time, I did not want to come at the time. I'm being very honest, Mr. President. I can't tell a lie in this place or anywhere else. But I was having the time of my life. I was having experiences and seeing places and having, work experiences that I thought were important to my own career development. But one day, after Barbados asked me at the time in 2013 if I would come back home, I was torn. And my boss at the time, he came to me and he says, "Lisa, you can't leave. You have to stay. You are carrying our trade and services sector on your back. We need you here." And that was the decision that I needed. I knew I needed to come home, because at the time, I was being asked to come home and head up what is known still as the Barbados Coalition of Service Industries. How would I stay overseas, even though I was having the time of my life, having experiences I knew I couldn't have here, but how could I carry the burden of another nation's services sector on my back when I was being asked to come home and help to resuscitate that of my own nation? And it is on that basis that I came home. It is on that basis that every time I have been asked to serve, I have said yes, because I love my nation. And despite all the other things that go along with it, you choose to curate what you focus on. You focus on love of country first and foremost. That is the commitment that I see from the people on this side, who have walked away from what they were doing before, how it enriched them before, how it satisfied them before, how they enjoyed it before, but they come and they serve for love of country. And so, Mr. President, I am confident that this bill, while it may be signaled as a seminal moment in the history of Barbados, and it should, that it must also be seen in the context of all the other legislative reforms that have been passed in this Parliament and in the last Parliament since 2018 that go hand in glove with the treatment of the prevention of corruption. And with these few words, Mr. President, I beg to move that this bill be read a second time.
Thank you very much, Senator Cummings. Senator Franklin.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. It is one of those rare occasions where I can say that I enjoy the speech from Senator Cummings, and then she spoiled it by starting talking about herself, but she can't help it. She was very articulate in this position, and I support what she said, most of it. And to tell you the truth, I have no difficulty with the prevention of corruption bill. I think it's long in coming. I remember when I was a boy canvassing, 1976. That was the talk on the campaign trail too, that they were going to have a prevention of corruption bill. And every other administration since then had plans to bring an anti-corruption bill. I think the only time one ever came was in the last administration, but they didn't proclaim it. That is now being repealed today, and we're putting this thing, because it actually was passed, but they didn't bother to, I don't know if the provisions were enough to scare the daylights of the people, so it doesn't see the light of day or what have you. This bill has its flaws. And I am not going to oppose it and want to have it thrown out altogether because of a few flaws. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time on my feet here today because my views on this bill are well known. It is needed, but if you look at the list of people who it covers, it includes public officers. Public officers already have in the Public Service Act everything that you want to do with them in this act. It's already in the Public Service Act. So you have two pieces of legislation now basically saying that, so you're getting two bites of the cherry at public officers, but the politicians who this act is intended to deal with, because the talk on the campaign trail was we had a lot of thieving politicians. Like, should I say thieving because no, that was a question in the other place where somebody said, call it thief, he said T-I-E-F. So I mean, there were allegations of thieving politicians, and we wanted to deal with them. This bill has gone more beyond them, and it's going to include people who there were already provisions to deal with. I'll give you an example. I have the Public Service Act pulled up here, and under the Code of Conduct and Ethics, it is the face where you can lose your job if you lie to the Prime Minister, a minister, the public, Parliament. If a civil servant lies and knowingly lies, that's Section 5, Paragraph 5C of the Code of Conduct and Ethics. So a public servant telling a lie is a serious offense. So it goes as deep as that, where you can lose your job by telling the boss something that you know to be untrue. So you can't get it more stringent than that, because the fellow might want to slip in a little white whenever so often, and no, even that is punishable. So you've got public servants already hamstrung by the law that says you can't tell a lie. Yeah, like public servants now have to be like Caesar's wife. But they go on. It says, where an officer believes, this is paragraph 11 of the Code of Conduct and Ethics. It says, where an officer believes that he is required to act in a way that is A, illegal, improper, or unethical, B, in breach of an accepted convention or professional code, C, may involve maladministration or is otherwise inconsistent with the code, the officer shall report the matter in accordance with the procedures laid down in the guidelines or rules of conduct for the officer's ministry or department, in accordance with the provisions of the relevant law. Then it goes on to say, an officer shall report his head of department to his head of department, or where the matter involves the head of department, the head of the public service. So if you have a complaint against, you saw the comptroller of customs doing something wrong, you can't go and complain to him for him. So you could then report him to the head of the public service. And it says, any evidence or unlawful activity, evidence of any criminal or unlawful activity by others in accordance with the relevant procedures and or instances of breach of this code. So even a public officer who sees his head of the department doing something that is not quite right or completely wrong, he has an avenue. But this act and the substance of this act, and Senator Cummings spoke to it somewhat, but she didn't go all in detail, but she didn't mention, call it whistleblower. Yeah, but the whistleblower legislation, we need that to accompany this act, and also the Public Service Act. Because I know of one young man, I'm older than he is, so I call it young man, who reported his head of department in the public service. He was acting in a senior position for 3 years. And the head of the department swore an affidavit knowingly lying about it. I walk with it all the time. I keep it in my bag. I keep a copy of it in my bag. I show people. Because this particular individual swore an affidavit to the court to say that the person was untraceable. But the man was in court, walking about. So, the father said, look, I'm going to come back. This isn't right. You can't be, but that senior person was helping to protect that man because a politician called upon him to do him a favor. I'm not going to call the politician's name, I'm not going to call the man's name. But he reported that misconduct, and he was acting to take him down. Just took him down. And the big joke is they put a man who has stolen some money from the department and was paying it back. They put him to act in the place of the person because, again, it wasn't this administration, so everything. And so he was aligned to the other administration, and he felt rather than lock him up for stealing this money, they gave him an acting position so he could get enough money to pay it back. And the only person that suffered was the innocent person who reported the misconduct. So we need, along with these pieces of legislation, whistleblower legislation that will protect the person who's Sandra Cummings said, she says, when you see something, you say something. Those are the words she used. I wrote them down. But here in Barbados today, when you see something and you say something, you can lose your pig. That happened to Wiseman. Sorry, didn't mean to call his name. No, I'm not going to say who. I just, that slipped.
I'm glad you didn't completely call us your name. I have not been so notified.
But
you caught yourself in time.
Yes.
Thank you, Senator Franklin.
He reported his head of department, and he suffered. So we need it. So the Public Service Act has these provisions more stringent than the ones that you have in this legislation. You can lose, and when the public servant is dismissed from the public service, he just don't only lose his job, he loses his pension. So you imagine a fellow my age, over 40, having to start back fresh and no pension to help you along the road. So it is a very serious thing to dismiss the public officer. And you can dismiss him for lying. As something as, somebody would say as simple as lying, but lying can be really dangerous, Because you can tell lies and if I get hanged. So I'm not saying that lying is a small measure, but I'm telling you that we don't need to involve the public officers under this piece of legislation because they're already covered. It says here, paragraph 12 says, where an officer has reported a matter referred to in paragraph 11 in accordance with the relevant procedures and believes that the response does not represent a reasonable response to the grounds of his concern, the officer may report the matter in writing to the Service Commission.
Nope.
So if you don't get satisfaction, if you feel like my boss is a thief and the people didn't deal with it, you could then report it to the Commission. But unfortunately, again, the Commission, and this is the one lead me on to something else, the Commission had people on there that, and I'm not talking about this Commission, that were more politicians than Bar Tom Adams. So they were more politically aware and biased. So they took care of the fellow because they were protecting one of their own. That is why, and that's one thing I draw me to a concern of this bill. In this bill, politicians nominate the persons who will sit on the commission. Just recently, the Prime Minister actually gave up, not necessarily gave up, but allowed the law to help her to select judges. And I commend her for that. So I would like her not only to be the person selecting these people, but there should be these commissioners, these people who are responsible for administering this bill, should be selected by the Governor General / President whenever that happens. That person should, and I'll tell you, when the President or the Governor General have reason to appoint these people, they have a wider pool, because some people don't like any tinge of politics around them. And you lose a lot of good people, and you can get a lot of good service out of some more people, but they don't want to get involved with politicians. I've seen it. So if the Governor General decides, well, look, I want you, and she calls upon you to say, I want you to be in this commission, it's an integrity commission, a person might be more inclined to accept an invitation and be hard pressed to say no to the Governor General or President, as the case may be. But so she will be able to have a wider pool, a bigger pool of persons, and who might not necessarily have political connections. Because I am afraid that some of the people who have political connections might slip in. Not necessarily under this administration or even the next. But it might come a time when you have people who are looking more out for their political interests than the interest of the country. I always think country should come first. But everybody don't think that way. So that is one area that I would like to see addressed, where the person appointing the members of the commission, not necessarily appointing, because the governor will appoint me then, but the recommendation should come from the Governor General, and she should make the appointment. She should do everything. She should call upon the people and say, well, look, I want you to be a member of this commission, not necessarily just only swear them in. So that is one aspect of the bill that I do not agree with. As I said, it isn't a bad bill, but these are things that I don't like about it. Because I don't want to throw out the baby with the bath water, but these are things, and I'm talking about things that I don't like. Not necessarily things that I like, because everybody can sing about them. But I'm talking about things like the blind trust, where you can put your money in a blind trust, and in little Barbados, everybody knows everybody else and things. They're going to be really blind to the person who owns that money. And if you want to come to public life and you don't want to declare your assets, don't come. That's my view. Like for me, now easy for me, mine is a letter size page, half of that page, and I covered. But some people have a lot more, and they don't want everybody to know that they have it. And some of the reasons why, and I go back to 1985 when they removed from the Companies Act the requirement to name shareholders. It's back now, after all these years. It is back. But it is not back in the kind of public way that I would like to see. Because you still can't go in the corporate affairs registry just like that and see it. And prior to 1985, you were able to go and check that the president owns this large company, but he has me and somebody else as directors. And nobody knew, but after that amendment, nobody would know that was his company, and I only fronted for him. I can say that because the president got a big set of money.
That's right.
So he wouldn't cringe when I say so.
That's right.
So we need to look at those aspects of this bill. And another thing, Senator Cummings said, and I agree with her, because corruption isn't necessarily, and I say, there's far more than a politician taking money. It is. And I would like to to speak to a couple of things. She mentioned persons with exam results. All over Queen's College this year, we are hearing that people who got grade 4s, they had some intervention and they subsequently got grade 1s. That is the words. People keep calling me and telling me these things about me talk about it. I can't talk about it here because I'll call us about name, and I will not do that. Right? So that is one aspect. We have the orchestration of who will be, or the manipulation of who will be the commissioner of police going way back. That is also wrong. It's also, if it is not corruption, it is close as possible to. If it isn't, it's just like a first cousin. Because there is already a process that does not involve politicians, except when the people come to a conclusion, they consult the Prime Minister as the head of the department, because under the Constitutional Amendments of 1974, the Prime Minister will consult on the appointment of permanent secretaries, deputy permanent secretaries, head of departments, and the deputy head of departments. That consultation does not necessarily mean agree, because the commission still has its job to do. They will consult. And there was a case in Trinidad when Patrick Manning was Prime Minister. He consulted with the commission about the appointment of a permanent secretary. But the commission did not agree. And the Prime Minister took the commission to court. And the court basically said, well, it's a consult. Consult doesn't necessarily mean agree. And that is our law. But our laws in Barbados now, a lot of them get observed in the breach. We need to take ourselves out. And look, I'll give an example. A few weeks ago, some people came to my office, and when I was coming downstairs about me, I know them from children. So they went to the National Assistance Board and asked them for a job. And the officer there said, yes, we got jobs available, but we can't give you, so you got to get something from the minister. And they figured, but I'm in the Senate, so I got to be a minister. Then, you know, sophisticated about these things. They just figure, but in the Senate, he's a minister. So I told him, listen to me. They don't mean me. And if you didn't get a letter from me, you don't get a job, period. So you need to find somebody else. I would be doing you the service if I give you a letter. But that too, but that officer telling those things, is corruption. Because that is not the process. We have in the public service, if you want to make a job, you got to know somebody. And then when I hear a defense about about the person who is now running the BTMI. Where I heard the minister say, they don't know anything about it, cabinet know about it. I found that strange. That didn't come from the board yet. I found it strange because I got it. And my advice to read newspaper. I always admit my things, don't worry. And I heard, sent it fall off a truck close to me when he was passing, so I just took it up. And I shared it widely. WhatsApp, newspapers, you get everybody. The problem here is the minister then came out in defense and they didn't know. And I found it strange that the only government agency in Barbados that somewhere at this level, the minister don't know up front what's going on, I found it strange. Man, you got in one mere job, the ministers know. Some man at the head of BTMI, and you think the minister know way in advance who it was going to be? Trust me, you can't improper motives to a person, so I'm going to say, but I'm tending not to believe that. So that's good. Thank you, sir.
That's fine.
I try my best to get in close with follow these rules as possible, but it is a bit more than I can believe. But that, if the ministers knew and had any influence on the process, that too would be corruption. So that is why a minister would have to say, I don't know, even if they knew. Because it is not allowed. We have a situation here in the same Public Service Act. I think it is so early in the Act, I think it's Section 3, that says that let me see if I read it for you, because repeating it, it's very early in the Act, I'll find it right now, but it says, this Act applies to temporary and permanent officers. So that means that if you want a job in the public service, even a temporary job, in a temporary department, you got to pass through the Public Service Commission, or the Protected Service Commission, or if it has legal qualifications, the Judicial and Legal Service Commission. But we have a department now called the what's the name? Public Affairs Department. I have not seen a single ad in accordance with the Public Service Act for people who work there. Mind you, I think it's an unnecessary department because we already have a substantive department whose function it is to do what they're doing. That department is called GIS. But we now have a parallel institution running with half of with GIS business. So you create another job ahead of the department and whatever else you have in there. Because I don't know, I've never seen the jobs advertised, and I don't know, all I know is who the people are. And I don't know that if they were supposed to go to GIS to get a job, if they were to qualify for MAID. But there are heads of department in a temporary thing. The minister has power under the Public Service Act to create posts, if you're a temporary post, and these temporary posts you can have them for a matter of 3 years, and then after the 3 years you can renew for a further 3, but no more. So you can have them for 6 years, but they creating the posts doesn't mean that you can fill them. It's not your job. So if that were the case, that too would be corruption. But that's only my speculation because I don't know. I see people there. I see people working in them. I didn't see any ads. So I come to a conclusion which might be erroneous. But they don't look erroneous to me. So I'm willing to be guided. No. Mr. President, I said I was not going to be long, but I started to get long, so I'm going to try to just deal with a couple of other things before I take my seat. What is topical in this country is the provision of housing. Everybody wants a house. And we're going to China for some of these fancy metal houses or metal, I don't know what kind of houses they are, and that Barbados isn't working fast enough. Before I say anything else, sir, I would like there to be a commission of inquiry into the operations of the National Housing Corporation and the Ministry of Housing. Because some of the statements that I am hearing coming out from the minister and the ministry do not square with my knowledge. I can tell you something that the minister said about awarding contracts to a particular individual company because of how fast they could do them or whatever else it could be, and that they took away the land that was supposed to be sold. They took that land and then said, well, look, this particular company will provide the housing. So I cannot say here and here what I know because I'm a unfortunately conflicted. Because I have, and I'll tell you, when people want the best industrial relations advice, they will call me. And that's not an ad, it's just the truth. And that company called me. And I told them how to settle the issue. Mind you, I saw the person in the other place saying, we win. It wasn't them, it was me who gave the company advice. Mind you, it was $500 an hour, but they could afford it. $26 for the other people like you, sir, and thing, but people like that, yeah, according to their thing. So the information that was given to me to settle that dispute does not accord what the minister says. Mind you, I cannot disclose it because I will be, nobody will call me again. I still got to eat. Because the little thing that I get, the representing civil servants don't really put gas in the car. So sometimes when I get these little commissions and stuff, I have to take them. Mind you, I settled it in favor, it was settled in favor of the workers. The advice that they gave said, no, you were acting contrary to what these rules are. Here are the rules and things. And it was settled. But because of the information that I got, I can say to you that somebody misled the minister. So what he said was not necessarily what I know or what the information I got. So somebody must have misled him because he don't go there and do the investigation himself. So I would have spoken to him, but I didn't get the chance yet because I know better. So I think we need an investigation. I'm talking about judicial inquiry, not a departmental inquiry, because they don't go anywhere, into the operations of the National Housing Corporation and the supplying of housing. Every so often you see people alongside the hovel saying that they were asking for things for years and the floor falling and that kind of stuff, and nobody's helping them. And the last thing I want to talk about, sir, well, substantively, of course, because I might talk about other things, but is this $24 million red herring. Really expensive red herring. And it is what I think my bishop called vaccine gate. I like that. I saw a letter, also that came to me by WhatsApp and emails and all kind of stuff, signed by a permanent secretary, purporting to do the job of the chief medical officer. Because the chief medical officer would be the person who is required to order these vaccines, and then he would send it to Central Purchasing. It's not Central Purchasing, no, they call it another name, man. Government Procurement Department. Thank you. And she's an old civil servant, so I will know about Central Purchasing. We didn't know them, they trip me up sometimes. But then the chief supply officer, or whatever they call him these days, would do the necessary to get it in here. But we see a permanent secretary sourcing vaccine, getting somebody to source vaccines. I don't have to say a permanent secretary because the minister in a newspaper article said he didn't know about it. And that is what caused me, because the minister and I go way back, my friend from the time I was about 13 years old. And it paid me to say that he should resign. He's a Commonwealth boy, and he's Commonwealth big. So I don't want that to him.
I know it's not tight.
I hope you're going to tight today, Julian. Oh, good, thank you, good. This is Commonwealth big, so this is obligation, sir.
But once you recognize that and hear the eyes have it and not the ties have it.
So we go way back. So it did not give me any pleasure to say publicly that he should resign. Because something of this magnitude passed through ministry and you got to be asleep if you don't know what's going on. Or and I'm telling you. Because the only body who should ever give that instruction to the minister, to the permanent secretary, would have been the minister or somebody senior to the minister. I haven't got nobody senior to the minister in the ministry of health. So that too might be tending toward corruption at breakneck speed. Mind you, the Prime Minister tried to say, oh, it is red herring, but $24 million in red herring is enough red herring, you know. That is not one or two containers of red herring. That's enough red herring. Mind you, sir, I like to let red herring never so often, but you know, and cuckoo. So I'm not opposed to red herring, but not so much. So these things that these need to be investigated. If only to clear people's minds and clear the perception that is out there. Because I got a lot of perceptions in here what's going on, you know. I can't voice them because I don't have facts. But I only bring facts here. But I have suspicions. And trust me when I tell you, this thing don't only look bad. It smells bad, but red herring don't smell so bad. So it can't be the red herring. You know? We have situations where people try to downplay things. Things don't need to be downplayed. Sometimes the best thing to do is to open the doors and let people see what happens inside. Let people see what is going on. Clear yourself. I worked for a minister years ago, and a person brought some bread. He wanted to set up a fancy bakery in Barbados, bakery in French, fancy thing. And he brought samples of the bread. When the minister came in, he saw the bread, he said, where did that come from? And when he told him, he said, no, stand in the back. No, I want to do that. And it was just bread. I didn't know what to do. So I gave the staff the bread to eat and tell you nothing. Because I had to feel really funny calling people back and telling them, well, come for this bread. You know, this thing. So when they say, he said, send them back. Bread. That's bread. And then talking about bread of the kind of putting in water. I'm talking about real bread made with flour. He refused even that. That's why today still has my undying respect. Because he was, in his political dealings and his ministerial dealings, he was as close to Caesar's wife as Caesar. You know, he didn't mix matters. Because he was afraid of any hint of corruption attaching to his name. And trust me, I used to always look. I never found any. But that was my thing. I can't help it. I used to always look. So these things look bad. These things look like corruption. And if they look so, you know, give the country the opportunity to see that they aren't. All in all, sir, I support the bill, and even though I have some reservations about it, the reservations are not enough to cancel out the support that I have. I am not a spoiled child. And if I don't get my way, and Senator Gwyneth agrees, that I'm not a spoiled child. So if I don't get my way, I will not scuttle everything. But at the same time, sir, I will wish government look at the things that I've said and try to fix them. Because you are putting an unnecessary burden on civil servants, as I said. And trust me, I'm one of the hardest people on civil servants, you know. I represent them. I'm going to do force I tell them. Only last night and this morning, I got a few calls from customs officers who said, that the Comptroller of Customs said at a meeting that I support the people being searched when they leaving the port, and when they leaving the port. Because there are certain categories of people who are above searching. And when the Comptroller put that to me in the meeting, and he said he's asking my support, I said, you don't have to ask my support because they agreed. But everybody that passes through the port should be searched, except the Governor General and the Prime Minister. Everybody. I told the Comptroller, even you. Because when you have a situation, you want to go anywhere, like the security area, and people know that you're not going to be searched. One morning, a fellow turned up at your house and knocked the door, and you open, he said, put something in your face and said, Skipper, I want you to take this in to me. I will stay here with your wife till the matter finish. What you going to do? Unless you really want to get rid of the woman. you know? You know? So you're going to carry in. But if you know that everybody going through those doors will be searched, nobody can come and put that unnecessary burden on you. So that's why reason I said to them, look, I support it, and I'm not going to say otherwise. I also said at that same meeting, they wanted customs officers to take lie detector tests. And I too supported that by saying I would be the first person to advise customs officers to take a lie detector test immediately after the cabinet take theirs. So we got to set an example. We got to live. If you are asking customs officers who don't have the kind of power of the minister to do a lie detector test, then the minister should get one. And if that is the case, then could they ever even want that one? But I have seen where a lie detector test exonerated an immigration officer. She came to me and it was a voice note that went out. And the voice sounded like hers. She even said that her brother asked her, what do you do? Because the voice sounded so much like her, that her brother, who lives at the same place as her, that grew up with her, thought it was she. And she said, it is not me. The police asked, would you take a lie detector test? She said, yes. They subsequently found out because then and she didn't even give me her phone, do the little fancy thing on the phone, and you know, you got a little zigzag and open the phone and give it to the police. The police were able to check and see that she was a recipient of the voice note, that she never sent it anywhere. And bring the trace back. They didn't want to do lie detector test. Because, so that there's a value to it. But if you're going to ask people to take lie detector tests, you'll be the first. And if you're the first, you're going to lead by example, but I can't look around and tell my members, man, don't mind them. Don't take the lie detector test. It isn't part of your contract. No, I ain't going to do that. I will advise you to take it if the cabinet take theirs first. First people to take them. Mind you, and I want an independent person at the test, because I want to ask you, is your name John Smith? You say yes. You know, and you get some little fancy questions that you want. You know, I want the same type of questioning going for everybody. So that is why I would want to have a presence or somebody else who would be able to determine, you know, like Maurice says, you are the father. We need that. So I am not going to get in the way of things that are going to improve the security of this country, because sometimes national security trumps a lot of the things. But you can't be selective in who you want to be. Because you ask a minister, suppose you ask a minister who's not in jail in New York, have you ever taken a bribe? You know, that thing will start scratching up the place. You know, it's a little deal that goes, well, here, where, when, you think. If he says, no, man, middle, go here, where. So that's why people like that should have like take the test. And that brings me to my final point. And the comment spoke about it, where you come in as a pauper. I don't necessarily want you to leave as a pauper, but your acquisitions with your salary, because if you're getting a salary roughly almost $16,000 a month, come, you're not going to be a pauper no more. But certainly you can't save out of that $15,000 or $16,000, you can't save in your mother's account $5 million. And we know of experiences like that. You know? And nobody asks you, explain this. So I'm totally in support of the explain wealth orders. Mind you, I can tell you been lotto. But then you're going to show me the lotto stub. But you had to be a lotto to get $5 million. Because if, and I know that person, because I follow politics, even though I'm not actively involved, I still follow things. So when they tell me that, and of course I represent people in the court process office. So when they tell me that they had a summons out for this particular man, a warrant to commit, because he didn't pay for his indiscretions. Child. The mother took him to court, he couldn't pay money. So there was an order to commit. Now, if you got enough money to pay maintenance, child maintenance, you can't got enough to save $5 million in less than 5 years. But everybody knows that. It is not hidden, because the problem that during process to sell the estate, money there. The mother doesn't want to be a millionaire. So we need things like this. So I'm not going to oppose this bill for the sake of opposing it. I just want to let you know, or to inform you, that my views should be taken into consideration. And if you're looking, because, you know, in all fairness to you, you don't ever get anything right the first time. So you can come the next time around and fix it. Change things. Because you have my support here. But, and it is conditional upon you doing the right thing. And knowing, I don't understand why everybody think that all civil servants are crook. I was a civil servant, and I never stole anything, like I recall. You know, and they lost like that. So and if you have rules for them already, there are rules. You're just going to put them under a lot of stress. Mind you, I heard when this act was first touted, a man saying to me, and one of our former colleagues, and when he heard that there are going to be legislation where you have to declare your assets, and they name it to a board, the school board, he said, no, I'm not declaring my assets, I don't want to know my business. So, and he stayed out of, hey, that's all well and good, I don't mind that. If you don't want this thing, stay out the public affairs. But if you become a public person, this COVID thing going on. If you are a public person, you must accept the scrutiny that comes with. That is why, sir, that piece, I think, I said I can support everything. I can like back down from all other things in this bill and say, look along, but not that. I would be always opposed to the blind trust. Blind trust. That is, I don't know if we ever had any in our laws before. I don't know if Senator Boyce knows about any, but I don't know of any blind trust in any legislation that we've had before. Not that I know all the legislation, but I've never heard of it in our setup. But we created it to protect politicians from us. When I say us, I mean we the people. No, politicians don't want protection from us. Politicians who come out to serve should come with clean hands. And if your hands are not clean, and you don't want the boy who knows, you should stay out of politics. Mr. President, I was only going to spend 15 minutes, but I realize we're going way past that. So I will go no further, and I'm much obliged to you, sir.
Thank you very much, Senator Franklin. Senator Boyce.
Good afternoon, Mr. President. Good afternoon to my colleagues. Sir, I just had the opportunity to hear my fellow senator stipulate that we didn't need certain legislation because we presently have enough. And by referencing certain provisions in the public sector legislation state that it's not necessary to bring this legislation to govern that body of persons. And the only comment I would make, sir, is that I don't agree with that position. But I find it somewhat ironic that just last week, my fellow senator took a certain stand, not because of a lack of legislation, but a lack of rules. So it seems you want it one way, but you also want it the other. And that's how I wish to start my commentary on this legislation, sir. The act which speaks to prevention, investigation, and prosecution of acts of corruption. And sir, it defines what corruption is. So it's not what my friend and fellow senator says it is. It's not what we feel it is. It's not what we even imagine that it is. The legislation speaks to what are the acts of corruption that are seeking to be treated. So when the act defines it, it gives an understanding as to what its purpose is. And that purpose, sir, is set out within the preamble. Objects and reasons. The bill will provide for the prevention, investigation, and prosecution of acts of corruption. These acts of corruption are then defined within Part 2 and given certain headings. So we have to be careful when we say, well, that person corrupt, or this is corruption when we're having this discourse. It leads to the situation where the public, who actually listen to what we have to say, might be minded to interpret the legislation in a way that is not being directed by the legislative body. In other words, when you see a spade, you call it a spade. If you know it's a spade, you call it a spade. But when it's convenient, you don't just jump up and say that it's a shovel. So, sir, in this legislation, corruption is given certain headings. There's bribery of public officials, foreign public officials, public international officials. There's trading in influence, offering of advantage. There's bribery in relation to contracts, in relation to tenders. There's bribery in relation to auctions. There's a definition of corrupt transactions, and those persons who are agents, colloquially we'll call them the bagmen. And there's actually a reference to private sector interactions, which is something which widens the scope. Because I believe it was said by a former leader in this country, it takes two, at least two, to be involved in an act of corruption. Senator Rogers might say you might corrupt yourself with your soul. But I'm talking about tangible acts. You can't do it by yourself. This concept of condemnation, where we point the fingers at others and say they are corrupt, presents a cognitive bias that fails to recognize it takes more than one party. And it takes more than one party because I can speak to personal experiences, sir, where me, without any influence and or power, have had persons in a previous time make certain approaches which I couldn't understand because I don't speak the language. But it does not take a great mind or any form of wisdom to recognize that when we sit down and condemn, we have to be mindful that the person we actually condemn is not ourselves. And sir, why this is important to capture it, and why it's important to recognize why it should extend to the public sector, because my friend and colleague, Senator Franklin, says, well, they have enough coverage there because they could lose a job. Well, this act takes it further, which says penalties for all is up to $1.5 million. You cannot conveniently want legislation for one thing and not for the other when it suits your purposes. We speak here for the public of Barbados, not for certain ilk. If I were to get up here and say this class of person shouldn't be impacted by that, you will say, well, that is bias. We have an obligation in here to speak to Barbados as an entirety. That is the trust which we have been remitted. And it can't be fair that certain persons are subject to certain penalties and others aren't. Now, sir, I have said this before, and I'll say it again. I was in Before Your Time when Senator Rogers made the quote that stuck with me, that you can't legislate morality. I like it. I like it, sir. Now, that's a bit of an affront to the legal concept of natural and moral law, which says, yes, you can legislate morality because morality is a convenience, a necessary convenience for society to function. That's philosophical meandering, sir. At the end of the day, though, even though we can't legislate morality, we can certainly hope that we can put penalties to dissuade those who seek and those who seek to do wrong within the context of what we're laying out the framework today, sir. But maybe we recognize, or maybe it's time when we have this discussion, as set out by Senator Franklin and Senator Minister Cummings, that this legislation is a long time coming. 1929 was the last piece of legislation, which I believe it was stated was working quite well. I can't recall the exact quote, sir. And there was, of course, the reference to the act passed in 2012, very powerful piece of legislation, but was never proclaimed. Now I can say, sir, do we know that this legislation will be proclaimed or assented? Is this a fair discussion? But sir, maybe we take the opportunity to actually have a discussion where we talk about what we define to be acts of corruption and recognize that persons who want to influence will always do so. And persons who are amenable to being influenced will remain as they are. So do we have the gumption, sir, to say that let's go further and let's legislate lobbying? Let's know who your donors are in the context of politicians, sir. When you get up to talk, say this speech is powered by XYZ. Thank you for the contribution. Maybe we're not there yet, but maybe we need to recognize that things are what they are, and that with the best of legislation, there will be players. So maybe it's less about restriction and more about regulation. But that's a comment and a discussion with regard to a future. We hope, sir, that at least this is a start. Now, sir, there are certain provisions which are in this legislation which came from the legislation that was passed in 2012. The legislation in 2012 also had certain segments which were included in the legislation with the integrity in public life, and I understand, as set out by Senator Minister Cummings and the Attorney General in the other place, that there is a raft of legislations as such to deal with the concept of corruption, public life, integrity, and these moral shackles that would ensure that we reduce corruption in this land, sir. But the question is this: the incorporation of the UN Convention ought and has been now made right with this piece of legislation. And I specifically want to make reference, sir, to two important articles. And we understand that this is coming, but the question is, why not have the protection of the witnesses in this piece? Article 32 of the UN Convention, sir, says each state party shall take appropriate measures in accordance with its domestic legal system and within its means to provide effective protection from potential retaliation or intimidation. So if I need to be protected, sir, from the powerful Senator Caswell, if that were to ever be the case, sir, not that it would ever be necessary, sir, Article 32 provides the prescription that the state pass the local legislative power for that to be done. So the question is, of course, why is that not being done now? But we understand that it is supposed to come. Of course, sir, the question is when. The question is when. The article goes on, sir, to allow evidentiary rules to permit witnesses and experts to give testimony in a manner that ensures the safety of such persons, such as permitting testimony to be given through the use of communication technology, such as video or other adequate means. And sir, I'm going to give Senator Caswell some more lashes. Sir, when you're in the fray of employment law and employment rights, sometimes the issue comes up with regard to statements that are made, and a witness who's afraid to give their statement because they're being bullied. And sir, certain employment law practitioners will jump and say, I need to know the witness, I need to know what they said, I need to be able to counter the arguments, I need to deal with it from a question of natural justice. Sir, the question is, in certain cases, just like in these, you have a need to protect certain witnesses, and once you have the essence of the statement, the response is all that is required. So we get into the concept of fairness, and all this comes into how quick we are to make these statements. Sir, Article 33 of the same UN Convention, which we are incorporating, calls for the protection of reporting persons. And again, the consideration of incorporation into its domestic legal system. But not just the incorporation into the legal system, sir. Appropriate measures to provide protection against any unjustified treatment. In other words, sir, where is the legislation to make sure that the persons who make the reports don't get subsequently unfair? We hear it's coming, but how do we really ensure that is done? And when will it come? It begs the question, sir, do we have the resources to do this? Do we have the political will to do this? I certainly hope so, sir. Sir, there was mention of a campaign with regard to getting the message out to the public, and that certainly is necessary. I hear there are more campaigns on the horizon, sir, but I don't know, we will see. There was supposed, sorry, you have caught that, sir? Sir, there was supposed to be campaigns in relation to the licenses. There was supposed to be campaigns in relation to the national ID card. The government is under a certain pressure with regard to resources. So when we speak about public education campaigns, we need to be understanding and realistic that while we may want that with the best of intentions, the question is whether we will be actually able to do it. We had a certain amount of disagreement with regard to the optics of recent legislation, sir, and I hope that we have learned our lesson with regard to getting that message out. If something as serious as corruption is to be discussed, if we are making these steps, let persons understand what we mean when we say corruption. When we take this consideration into play, sir, and I must admit a certain bias because I know the gentleman who held the role, the question is, do we go further and consider in Barbados the utilization of a contractor general? Sir, we recognize the award of contracts has become a repeated mark of contention. And the reference, sir, to having a contractor general would be to provide assistance to the auditor general who comes in at the back end, ostensibly to lament that these things weren't done. Having a contractor general provides a first guard, and the auditor general then sweeps. This, sir, would also provide protection for potential abuse of any tender process and provide the checks and balances, which I know is craved by this government and all of us inside here, sir. But it's all right to speak about these offices. But as set out by Senator Minister Cummings, the question is, do we have the adequate consideration and financial wherewithal to provide for it? Where will the resources come from to fund the necessary bodies? Where would the resources come from to ensure that it's staffed with persons with the adequate skill set which won't allow them to be subject to being manipulated and run around by lawyers and others who are able to practice the craft, sir? Where would the element of sophistication be trained and imported into these organizations to provide this level of protection? It's okay to say that we're doing it. We need to take the steps, sir. We need to take steps, sir, to understand that there's actually proper records and secure records. Secure records in terms of the information that is gathered. It has to be a balance between keeping the confidential information related to the acts of corruption balanced against the concept of freedom of information, which we haven't yet legislated fully, as well of considering the element of fairness. At the same time, sir, when we consider the independence of these bodies, it ties back into the need for the financial resources, but the same guards who we appoint, quis custodit ipsos custodec, I think I got it. Who is going to protect us from these guards, sir? So there needs to be the legislative and the governmental oversight of any form of corruption body which still has to maintain an element of independence. This is a long road that we are on, sir. But hopefully it is one in which we would achieve the objective. Sir, it's a recent refrain to speak about who we are. So by using these recitals, let's ask ourselves, are we really prepared to have an honest conversation about corruption? We can speak about corruption as defined in this act. I think we could do that and holler hard, but the corruption as set out by Senator Caswell Franklin and defined by my friend, maybe that's a different question, sir. Is it true, as some say, that who we are, that we cover up things, sir? Is it true that we have a culture of silence, which doesn't give a true reflection of what corruption exists? I am so proud of our ranking in the Transparency International, the highest in the Caribbean, sir. 29 in the world, sir. Very proud of that. But there are those who say that that is that because of how we are and we do not speak truth to power absolutely. Who knows? If that is the case, sir, maybe this legislation is the start of an attempt to pull back the curtain. Hopefully we like what we see, but we may not. I recall interacting, sir, with a very senior investigative journalist who said, and I quote, When the just want investigative journalism until when again investigate. In conclusion, sir, I believe that we are ready for the conversation that we need to have. I support this legislation and believe it's a good start. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you very much, Senator Boyce. His Honor, Senator Greenwich.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I rise to give my support to this Prevention of Corruption Bill 2021. And sir, I wouldn't be long, because much of what I had intended to say, I've heard from Senator Cummins on my way here. And I also heard a few things from Senator Boyce and Senator Franklin, which I too would have wanted to mention. But sir, when I was just getting my feet wet in politics many years ago, I remember going to a political meeting in Church Village, St. Philip. And at that meeting, I heard 3 Barbados Labour Party stalwarts now, one after the other, rise and they got on the platform, and they said one after the other, somebody going to get locked up for KRC. And they said it is true, it is a fact, and we mean it, somebody going to get locked up for KRC. Yeah. And they wouldn't know about it. No, they're too young. And, sir, let me say that from then until the last election, I have been hearing every time somebody can get locked up for something on the political platform. Indeed, on the last occasion, if I remember correctly, I heard somebody can get locked up for Cahill, it is? Cahill. Somebody can get locked up for what going on at Transport Board. All these things I heard, and that was my party. And what I'm saying is that from the days of KRC until now, I have been hearing that some politician, is going to be locked up for some misdeed. Now, it has proven to me, and I'm sure that it has proven to many others too, that that threat that a politician or government official is going to be locked up for something like that is more easily said than done. More easily said than done. Now, Senator Boyce has pointed out how corruption is defined in this Prevention of Corruption Bill. And it is a long and winding kind of definition. But put in a nutshell, what the definition is saying is that if any government official wrongfully uses his position to procure some benefit or some advantage for himself, for his relatives, or for his friends, then he, of course, or she, would be guilty of corruption. And as was said by nearly every speaker so far, the 3 speakers before me, the benefit does not have to be cash. as so many people who talk about corruption seem to think, the benefit does not have to be cash. And this is set out in the definition section, where it says it can be money or any gift or loan or fee, reward, bonus, commission. And it goes on to list so many things that can take the place of cash when it comes to corruption. So it doesn't have to be cash. Yes, the primary proceeds may very well be money. But sometimes that check, that money, does not even end up in an account of that government officer or bearing that government officer's name or that politician's name. It can end up, I think I heard somewhere today, end up in a mother's account or something like that. But it can end up in a relative's account, a friend's account, a company's account. And it is, yeah, it is hidden. It is hidden. But, sir, as we all know, it can be airline tickets, can be a cruise, can be getting your son or your daughter into certain school or university, can be gaining membership to a prestigious club, and so on. Once it is something worthwhile like that, it falls into the category of being corruption. Now, you cannot single out any particular politician or government officer as being corrupt if you don't have the proof. You shouldn't do it. You shouldn't single out any particular politician or government officer as being corrupt if you do not have the proof. And one of the main reasons why I make this point is because the consequences of defamation can be very, very high, and they can bring you to your knees. That defamation suit can bring you to your knees if you do not have adequate proof that the particular person is corrupt. Proof is not always easy to come by. And as I said, I've heard these threats on so many occasions that you're going to do this and then you can't do it. You realize it's not that easy. Question always is, where is the proof? And you must have that evidence. You know, the entire country may very well believe, and in some instances may even know, that that particular person is indeed corrupt. But the proof is not there. And not only that, persons do not really want to come forward and provide evidence of corruption against powerful politicians or government officials. And whether we like it or not, that is a fact. One of the first things you will hear Barbadians say is, I have my house, and I have my family to look out for, and nobody isn't going to burn down my house, and nobody isn't going to destroy my family. And that is something you hear people saying all the time. And we are so much, I believe, unlike other countries. If we take the United States, for example, big people are brought down every day. And they're brought down not only for corruption, they're brought down for things like sexual assault, corruption, and so on in the United States. And it would appear to me as though those persons are more willing to expose politicians and celebrities than perhaps we in the Caribbean are. You will find, sir, that people will write books now about Donald Trump. People will, I'm sure Senator Rogers will agree with me, people will expose the televangelists in the United States. People have exposed Governor Cuomo and Bill Cosby and Adam Sanford and Bernie Madoff and a whole long list of them in a way that I'm sure they wouldn't have done in the Caribbean. I didn't want to sing Luke Barbados and say, I'm sure it wouldn't done in Barbados. Let's say the Caribbean. But those countries seem to more go after persons of that ilk. Remember, sir, that we live in a small society where everybody knows everybody. And people do not feel safe. And as I said, they are not bold enough to expose these powerful government officials. I know about a case where, I think it was in Trinidad, there were about 13 witnesses in a particular case. And when the case came to be heard, there was only one witness alive. And when Senator Boyce said just now that legislation to protect witnesses to run alongside this type of legislation would be absolutely necessary, he is so right. He is so correct. I also know of a recent case where, sir, if it was left to Barbados alone, I believe you know of the case too, sir, if it was left to Barbados alone, there would not have been a conviction. There would not have been a conviction. Would not even have been a charge, Senator Franklin is saying. But that is the attitude that we take as Barbadians. Indeed, sir, I can tell you that quite recently, in our public service, very well-known government department, there were two persons there who were given a lot of trouble. And the supervisor was asked to write a report on those two trouble trees. That is the only way they were going to take action against them. The supervisor was asked to write the report. And the attitude of the supervisor was, who? Not me. I don't want the body burned down my house. That was the attitude of the supervisor. So what happens? Those two persons have continued to work in the department. Those two persons have continued to give trouble. All because there is this mentality of fear and reluctance by people to come forward and give evidence. As I said, sir, corruption is a very serious charge, a very serious accusation. And you can be sued for defamation. And the very politician or the very government official that you are trying to put under stress is the one who may have the last laugh at you if you cannot come forward with proof. Because you see, sir, just saying that somebody is corrupt is not enough. It is the proof of corruption which is important, and I cannot say this enough, Mr. President. And Mr. President, that evidence of which I speak, that proof of which I speak, must not center around gossip. It must not center around I believe. It must not be flimsy evidence. It must be sufficient to produce a conviction for corruption. The testimony, sir, must be convincing. And above all, sir, it must be true. Sometimes it calls for having the checks, for instance, which would have been exchanged for the favor. If you can get the tickets, for instance, which would have been given for the trips, or the proof that that sum of money we heard about was deposited to a particular account, especially if it is deposited on the same day that a particular contract was given, and so on. But the evidence is so crucial. And all of the talk you can hear at the meetings about somebody can get locked up, it's not always that easy. Yes, Mr. President, I do agree that there may very well be corruption in high places. But the sad thing about it now is that we, too, we as politicians, are all painted with the same brush. And that is so unfortunate. All politicians, it would appear to me nowadays, are presumed to be and deemed to be, in some way or fashion, some form or fashion, corrupt. Very few people say, yes, Minister X has been working first as a lawyer. Now he has been a minister of government for 6 years, and he has just bought himself a BMW. Immediately they mention that BMW, people associate it with some form of corruption. And you wonder why this has to be so. Why? Every time the politician. Nowadays, sir, it seems to me that it is so uncomfortable being a politician, because it looks as though you're targeted. You're targeted, even in here, you're targeted simply because you're a senator. And that is so, so unfortunate. Our accounts, people may not know, our accounts are scrutinized in a way that the average person's account is not scrutinized. And whenever there's a sizable amount deposited to that account, whether you have sold the property or not to get that, it arouses some kind of suspicion. It is indeed uncomfortable being a politician. Mr. President, at the international level, we cannot be aiding and abetting corruption in any manner whatsoever. And we cannot appear to be a jurisdiction where nothing happens in the fight against corruption. Sir, we have to be serious and appear to be, we have to look the part, serious about stamping out corruption. And we have to do everything to encourage persons who have information, who have proof, and who have evidence to come forward. So it is not that government does not want to, as we say, somebody can get lock up persons or lock up somebody. It is that we need that evidence. You can't just say, I hear that you are corrupt, and arrest the person. As I said, sir, the stark truth is that we have to protect this country's reputation. And perhaps one of the biggest reasons for this is because we live now in a world of relative evaluation. We live in a world of international yardsticks, a world of international classification. We live in a world of international rankings. That is what it is. And the easiest thing that could happen to a country like Barbados is to have ourselves placed on a gray list or a black list. And sometimes I wonder too, sir, what measurements are being used to arrive at these listings, because some of the results definitely baffle me when I see them. We are ranked, sir, as a country because of our relationship to what we do, to the incidents of things like child labor and homelessness and drug trafficking and corruption. And there's this international push now, sir, against money laundering and corruption. And of course, this type of legislation, which we're dealing with today, putting this on our books will go a long way in determining our position internationally. We have to remember too, sir, that people want to set up offshore companies in Barbados, and we cannot give the impression that we are a corrupt jurisdiction in any way. We cannot make it seem as though government officials and politicians here do not want to support this type of legislation because politicians and government officials are complicit. We don't want to give that impression. And I finish, sir, with this sentence, that we have to remember that the reputation which Barbados had yesteryear is not the same, sorry to say, as the reputation which it has today. I'm obliged to you, Mr. President.
Thank you very much, Senator Greenwich. Senator McConney. Breaking for lunch? Yeah.
Mr. President, I beg to move that this sitting now be suspended until 3:15.
The question is that this sitting be suspended until 3:15 today. Honorable senators in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. The ayes have it. Sitting is accordingly suspended.